Century 14 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike. This episode is brought to you by Ride-On Optics. Ride-On is bringing you high-quality glass at a great value. I use and trust their scopes, binoculars, and red dot sights, and you can too with their unconditional lifetime warranty. If you ever have a problem with their gear, they will replace it, not repair it, finish up your next build, and keep a little extra cash on hand for ammo so you can actually go out and shoot that thing. Find your next optic at rideonoptics.com.
And this is Jim. This episode is also brought to you by Manus X. You're not going to get better at shooting on your own. You need practice, data, and coaching, and you need to make the most of your ammo with good live and dry fire training. Manus is a family of training devices that tracks your movements while you train. It times and tracks everything you do in a shooting drill and coaches you as you go. It is indispensable to taking your shooting to the next level. You can find them on manusx.com. So this is the episode we get to talk about one of my favorite topics in the world, doggies. This has been a long time coming. I have been bugging Mike to do an episode about dogs since we started this project. Mike would come to me and he'd be like, Jim, I want to do an episode on the science of learning and the power of habit. And I'd be like, no, why don't we do an episode about dogs? And, or like fights you've been in at work or other exciting stuff. And so we compromise and we do an episode about like the science of learning and military doctrine or Sun Tzu or whatever. So finally, Mike is indulging me and has kindly offered to talk about his work as a canine handler, police canine handler. Now, for a lot of reasons, we end up leaving out a lot of details about our day-to-day jobs. But as it relates to this episode, it's important to understand Mike has been a police dog handler for 8 years. He's been assigned 2 dogs in that time, and in that time, he has employed the dogs in both patrol and SWAT capacities on a daily basis in a metro area in the Southwest. So that's pretty cool. And dogs are cool, and working dogs are especially cool. And I think most of the people who listen to Tactical Tangents understand that like in their souls. So we're going to bounce around a little bit. I've got kind of some basic questions up front that I just want to, I think anyone might want to know about being a police canine handler, that sort of thing. And then we'll get into the art and the science of training a dog, and hopefully give you some lessons, whether you're an experienced canine handler from military, law enforcement, whatever, or if you have a beagle that keeps jumping on your table, right? Hopefully you're going to get something out of it no matter what your background is. And that's one of our goals tonight on the podcast. So first off, Mike, tell us about your dog.
Well, he's not my dog. He's the city's dog, obviously.
The taxpayer's dog. Yeah. That's right.
He's an 8-year-old Belgian Malinois. His name is Blitz. He came from the Czech Republic. All of our dogs are imported from Europe. We get them through a vendor in Southern California. And when we get them, they don't have any training other than the protection sport work that they might have done overseas as like a, like competition sports stuff. Nothing explicitly police related. So we get them with some of that background and then we train them up. We got him pretty young. He was about 1.5 years old when we got him. And he's going to retire soon, it sounds like, probably. He's getting old. And he's got, he's got a lot of time on the street. He's got a few dozen physical apprehensions, a whole bunch of fines, whole bunch of probably, I don't know, thousands of deployments. And he's a very good boy.
This dog has more SWAT callouts than most SWAT guys around the country. He's operator's fuck.
I've literally pointed that. I've pointed that out to guys. We one time we were on an op. We were in a backyard containing a house, and I was in the back seat with the dog as we pulled up and contained this house. And one of the new guys that was out of the car covering us and had some other less lethal and shields and ladders and I put him in the front seat and I got in the back and. The guy came to get in the seat, and I'm like, "Get in the back, rookie." The dog's like, "I got more ops than you, fool." So that actually comes up from time to time.
So you mentioned he's a Belgian Malinois, and that, in my experience, confuses people who have like a picture of a police dog and what traditionally meant a police dog was a German Shepherd or something that looked a lot like a German Shepherd. And I'm sure you get asked a lot, is that a German Shepherd, of course, the finest of all dog breeds, the German Shepherd. Can you explain just real quick, just basic breeds that are common in police dogs and what the differences are and why one gets picked more than the others, anything like that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of generalizations that can be made about breeds of dogs, just like with certain types of people, right? There's a personality type, and even though each individual is unique and their own special little snowflake, there's still such thing as, like we've talked about in the past, the tactical personality, right? And so generally speaking, with the dogs that we are looking for and the things that we are looking for, the herding breeds tend to do well in our line of work. And that the collection of traits that we look for most often are found in Dutch Shepherds, German Shepherds, and Belgian Malinois. And again, among those breeds, you could still kind of distinguish from dog to dog which personality, so to speak, has the right fit for things. But you know, there's places and agencies out there that use Rottweilers or Dobermans or even like pit bulls for certain things. If you just need a dog for detection work, you might just have like one of the retriever breeds, like a Labrador or a Golden Retriever, something like that. So I've seen beagles, you know, I mean, so it really depends on what you're going to do with them. And for us, generally speaking, the right blend of traits you tend to find in one of those three breeds.
Right. What inspired you to volunteer for that assignment?
That's actually a cool story. It's a short story. So I was brand new as a rookie cop. I had been on my own. I was still on probation, but I was on my own as like a solo cop. And there was a home invasion robbery. A bunch of dopers robbed some other dopers, and we got in a pursuit with them. And some guys bailed out, and the car kept going, and we chased them down, and the helicopter had some guys out in the field. And when some of the guys that bailed early in the pursuit, there was this big canine search for. And I went back over where that was occurring, and they needed someone that had a rifle to go help one of the dog handlers, he's still a dog handler with our unit. He's actually our head trainer. And I took my long gun out, green, fat, dumb, and happy, not knowing what the hell I was doing. And we went looking for this home invader. And as we're walking by, the handler is like, he's in there. And I'm like, what? And he's like, he's in there. Hey, police department, you need to come out. We're going to send the dog in there. We're going to get bit. And the guy's like, okay, I give up. And I'm like, what the hell is happening right now? I don't even know. Like, so that escalated quickly, right? And the lesson in there is that the handler in that case was able to just read the dog before he was barking, before he was, making this big production out of finding this bad guy. There were behavior changes in the dog based on him reacting to the odor of a human that gave us that early warning and helped us locate the guy. And so there's a little bit of the other thing that stood out about that story was, so this guy was in an area we couldn't get into. He had to come climbing over a gate to get to us. And he came out and he gave up and, hands in the air, and the dog's barking at this point, just pissed off, like ready to go kick some ass. And the guy just looks terrified, just absolutely terrified. And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking like, man, this guy just went and did this like violent takedown robbery, duct tape people and hold them at gunpoint, kicking front doors and all this stuff. And like, and here he is looking like a little bitch, for lack of a better term, right? Like, oh, you're not such a tough guy now, are you? And from that call forward, I'm like, well, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to do that. So
it's funny. People talk about the universal language of a shotgun or whatever. I think there's absolutely universal language to a pissed off working dog, right? That all around the world, people know what that means.
Generally speaking, you'd be surprised though. Fight or flight is a real thing. And so, I've got video after video now of stop or I'll send the dog, stop or I'll send the dog, stop or I'll send the dog. And people just keep running. And you're like, all right, well, we'll see how that works out for you.
Run like a rabbit, get chased like a rabbit, right?
Yeah.
Did you grow up with dogs?
I had a German Shepherd when I was a little kid. I think we got him don't know how old I was. I was little when we got a German Shepherd when I was a kid, and he lived until I was about 12. And then we had a lab, and my stepdad had like a little, I don't know, a Sheltie or something growing up. So yeah, we had a couple dogs growing up. None that I was particularly involved in training or doing much with, other than living with at home.
Yeah, I've known Mike for most of our lives at this point, and I can't distinctly remember him being like a super big dog guy until his time in the police department, right? What did you do to prepare for the assignment? Once you decided you wanted to be a canine guy, did you go read a book? Did you go to like the PetSmart dog training classes? Like, what did you do?
So there are some books that are helpful, and at the time that I got in, we had to read and be familiar with for the test. And so, you talk to the guys in the unit, depending on where you work, and they will generally steer you in the right direction. And that is still the culture in our unit today. If people want to get involved, they can come to us and we'll help them out and point them in the right direction. And some of it is dog stuff. It does help to understand some dog stuff, right? But a lot more of it has to do with just being a good cop. And not only being a good cop, but understanding use of force and understanding case law behind use of force, especially related to the canine, which is not really any different than any other kind of less lethal option, right? But there is specific case law that helps you kind of understand where it falls in the use of force continuum. And
this is a real contentious thing right now, right? Because police are getting more and more scrutiny for uses of force, and dog bites look very, very vicious. And there's history there, right? There's history going back 150 years about dogs being used against certain demographics more. So this is sensitive shit.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't understand that, you probably shouldn't be playing with it, right?
Sure.
So there's context that you got to learn.
Yeah. But, all that being said, being a good cop and understanding tactics and challenging assumptions. I mean, there's a lot that goes into any use of force decision. It doesn't have to be specific to a dog or a dog bite for that matter. And also being able to separate the justification of certain things of whether or not you can get away with a decision versus is this decision a good idea, right? And there's a lot of that plays into the context of a dog. Could I send my dog in to go get this guy? Sure. But then I'm going to have to go in and go get this guy. And is that a good idea? Right. So there's a lot of tactics that get wrapped up in those decisions. And so being a good cop plays into this kind of, the full range of policing fits into your decision to get into this line of work.
I like that. What are the most common questions you get from the public about the dog? I imagine you can get a lot of questions. Dogs naturally attract certain people. I want to go pet dogs every time I see them.
Does he bite? Yes, but only when I tell him to, kind of. Sometimes we'll get questions about like how old they are or how many people has he caught or what do they eat. Nothing. A lot of the demonstrations and stuff that we do in public have to do with kids. And so, which is cool. Like the dogs specifically attract kids, and I have a dog that likes and interacts well with kids, and so it's all good. But you get kid level questions most of the time.
Yeah. And I get that. Occasionally I volunteer with elementary schools and stuff, and I'll show up in uniform, and kids ask me how many times I've been killed. And I'm like, well,
yeah,
not yet.
Yeah.
Are there questions you wish people asked you? Like, something you wish the public understood about the work or the dog or anything like that?
Not really. I think we do a pretty good job of advertising the things that we need to advertise. I mean, primarily, if you wanted to talk about today's climate, and you kind of alluded to this, where the whole thing about the use of a dog in an apprehension of a criminal is a significant use of force, right? And it's also pretty rare. In the grand scheme of things, it's actually pretty, even the busy canine teams, most of the people that they're dealing with are gonna either give up or they're not gonna be found. And when they do get found, the ones that result in like a significant use of force is pretty small, and really, but it's understanding that we use these dogs primarily because of their nose and because of their drive and their instincts, and that gives us an early warning system that we can put out at the end of a 6 or 15 or 30-foot leash when we go looking for someone. And that early warning system is a big deal. And ultimately, they're a locating tool, right? It's to go find somebody, and I don't know where they're at. The guy at the church, I would have never known that guy was there if I was just wandering around looking for somebody, right? But that handler with that dog was able to say, there's somebody in there, and that was a clue, right? So I wouldn't say that there's questions that I want people to ask so much as capabilities that I think are important to kind of put in the spotlight, for the sense of police use of force is under a microscope. And so let's make sure that we're seeing it for what it is. And these dogs, we don't walk around with these dogs for the bites. The bites just come with the business, right? Like that, the apprehension part of this is because sometimes bad guys are faster than me, especially when I'm carrying a bunch of shit. And so they happen, but that's not where they or we make our money. Where we make our money is finding people that wouldn't be found. And so I think understanding that is probably a bigger deal.
And there was some magic, a lot of magic in what Mike just said, but one thing I want to highlight out of that, I have an editorial about policing that a scared cop is a dangerous cop. A surprised cop is a dangerous cop. If you look at videos of questionable police shoots in the last 20 years, and we're seeing more and more of them as more and more police officers wear body-worn cameras and dash cams. You see when a police officer is caught off guard, that is when the situation will escalate beyond the control of anyone on the scene in many cases, right? And so one of the things Mike mentioned there was the dog keeps you from being surprised. And that's important, right? Surprise is a tactical key concept. So I just wanted to highlight that.
For sure.
I have noticed that you work in a very hot environment. American Southwest. What do you do to ensure the dog doesn't cook in the back seat of your car, or even just walking on the pavement? Like does he wear little booties when it's 110 degrees out? Does he drink drop or rehydration solution? What does he do?
So he does have little booties, and those were actually donated to us because we didn't buy them for whatever reason. Or I should say the ones that they bought for us were pretty lame. They were garbage. And so we got some good ones donated to us. As far as the heat goes, so all of our cars now have legit purpose-built heat alarms. And so there's temperature sensors in the car. As the car stays running, the AC stays on. He's got water in the back in the kennel, and they have a cell chip. And so the cell chip will notify me if it goes above a certain temperature, and it has like a warning temperature and then an alert temperature. And if it goes off, it'll make a bunch of noise. It'll roll the windows down. It kicks on a fan. We didn't always have those. There was a luck as a tactic for a long time as far as our ACs failing in our cars. But the heat alarms that we have now are pretty legit, and they generally work. As far as actually working the dog, that's something that you kind of have to work out between the dog and the handler. I have to know how hard I can push my dog, and I've certainly had days where I've pushed him a little hard. But they do have a work span, where in the summer I might be able to go get 15, 20 minutes out of him, and then that's it. He's done. He's going to be out. They generally recover pretty quick, so I can put him back in the car. He can cool off. I hose him down along the way. Like, if I'm searching yards and I come across a neighbor, I can ask him, hey, can I use your hose and cool my dog off? But they do have a limited span that they can work in the heat. That's definitely a factor. And if we're looking for someone serious enough, then that's when we have to just call in more dogs to help us.
There's a saying that in many cases you can defeat the handler before you can defeat the dog. I don't know how often that comes up in you guys' world, but often these dogs are pretty hardy, I imagine.
Yeah, I'd say that's generally true. I mean, again, if I'm looking at the dog and just saying, like, how hard can I work him in the heat, that's a little bit different than things like psychologically, there are I have seen handlers from around the country at different training events and stuff like that we did a scenario one time at a survival seminar that we go to that required handlers to jump a wall, and and it was simply for that. It was just, like, your dog can get over that wall. Can you? Especially with all your crap on. And so that comes up. But again, some of that is as much psychological as it is physical.
Can you explain the differences between a canine and a pet dog? Even if they look the same, what's different about them?
Well, breeds are breeds, right? And you can go buy a Malinois or a Shepherd or a Beagle or a Lab or whatever you want and get the perfect dog for you, whatever that is, right? German Shepherds in particular are known for being pretty independent, pretty aloof, but also pretty loyal and very strong pack drive, which is why they make good family protection guard dogs. Maybe not in the sense that they'll actually go and bite people, but they're good at that territorial protection. They'll bark at people when they approach the house and the things that most people generally want out of a dog. But that being said, my requirements for a pet are going to be different than my requirements for a working dog. And so when I'm looking for the perfect working dog, it's kind of a unicorn, right? In a working dog, I want a dog who is friendly, but also not a coward, who has an insatiable hunt and prey drive, who is independent and confident in just about any environment I can put him in. I
want to talk about insatiable real quick. It's hard for people who haven't been around these dogs much to understand the level of insatiable that Mike is talking about, right? And we talk about this in the tactical personality episode. I'm glad you brought this up, right? Think of that dial. A working dog has that drive, the chase drive or whatever, at like 8 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10. And it's not unusual to find them at a 12 out of 10. And that's different from, that would be a rough pet to have.
Yeah.
In many cases. That's not a fun pet.
Yeah. Well, and going back to the heat related question, my dog will work himself to death. There is zero doubts. And that has happened around the country. They will work themselves literally to death out there hunting for a bad guy. I have to be the mature adult at the other end of the leash that says, why don't we hose you down and put you in the back of the car for a little bit?
Yeah.
Get you some water, because they will hunt forever for as long as they've
Last week I took my male German Shepherd on a 12-mile hike, and by mile 10, he was just lying down like, so you're going to carry me?
Nah, brah.
You're going to carry me,
yeah.
aren't you?
Yeah. And I've worked my dog to a point, as he's gotten older, and I've been working day shift in the heat where, he will get to the point where he'll start to kind of seek out shade and he's kind of done. But make no mistake, like if I go into a yard, he's hunting. And if he gets a whiff of a bad guy, he's all in, right? So it's pretty unmistakable when you've experienced that, but a lot of people who are like, oh, this dog has this dog Dolly has a drive for it. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. And you don't want that. You don't want that in a pet, right? You don't want that in a dog that doesn't have a purpose and a job, because that level of energy will turn into behaviors that you don't want unless you vector it somewhere useful. So yeah, it's pretty unmistakable. The other thing I was starting to talk about was you also want a dog who is pretty independent and pretty comfortable or confident in any environment. So I need to be able to take this dog around helicopters. I need to be in a crowded, dark space. I need him to go onto slick floors or uneven surfaces. He can't be afraid of heights. He can't be afraid of, loud noises. There's all kinds of things that environmentally the dog has to be pretty okay around.
It's amazing how many badass dogs are freaked out by tile floors.
Yeah, tile floors or like thunder and lightning. We've actually got a dog who is a total stud when it comes to working, but terrified of storms. It happens. And with the same level of independence that I need out of that dog, who I might send by himself into a building, and I need him to go by himself far away from me to do his thing, I also need a dog that has a real strong desire for that pack interaction, right? Strong pack drive where the desire to defend the pack, if it means fighting, is high, but he's also okay with being number 2, right? You see why this is hard, right? This is hard to find a dog that satisfies these requirements, right?
You got to get all those dials at the right level,
Right.
and that is rare.
So
Right.
to get a dog like that who is physically capable, has the intensity and the desire to work, turns out that's going to cost you probably about $12,000 most days. It's probably about what we pay just to get them, right? That's not training. And to find that dog, you'll still have to hunt for it. We might go test 10, 15, 20 dogs and find 1 or 2 that will meet those requirements. So it's a lot to ask for, right? And for good reason. For the situations and the circumstances that we're putting these dogs in, we need that. And if you think about it, it's not terribly unlike hiring a good candidate to be a cop or hiring a good candidate to be a pilot or anything like that. You have to select the right people for the job, right? Now that's different from what I would ask for from a pet. And for a pet, I probably, something a lot simpler. I want a dog that's interactive and affectionate, not super independent, because I don't want this dog really doing its own thing. I want him to just kind of listen to me and be happy and make me happy and make my kids happy. I want a manageable amount of prey drive, right? I want the dog to be playful, but not out of control. And I want the dog to be motivated by food and by toys, but not have so much intensity that it's a full-time job to keep them occupied, right? So generally calm, generally submissive, not really up for facing much adversity like I would expect out of a working dog. Probably a totally different thing that I want from a pet compared to a working dog.
And you have a couple pet dogs, if I remember right, who live with your canine. How does that go? Does the canine eat the other dogs, or?
No, they all get along fine. It gets a little. One of them is kind of like the old lady of the bunch, and we call her the yard monitor. And so she tends to yell at the other dogs. The other one is really rambunctious with the working dog, and so they get a little rowdy. We generally keep them separated just because it's obnoxious, not because they fight or anything, but because we're like, all right, that's enough. Go away. So
Simmer down now.
But and we'll get into this a little bit further, but dogs are pack animals. They live in packs. And so it is natural for dogs to be around each other.
Maybe a silly question. What kind of dog food does he eat?
Our dogs all eat just a grain-free kibble. Nothing special. It's a grain-free food. So that, I guess, is the dietary uniqueness about it. We have a couple options. We happen to use a Victor grain-free brand food, and Taste of the Wild is one of the options that we have. There's people out there that do like a natural diet. They feed their dogs like raw chickens and ground beef.
I tried that once. It did not work out well for my dogs.
There's
I'm
nothing.
not judging. It
There's
just did
nothing,
not work for my dogs.
There's nothing wrong with it, I wouldn't say. It's more stuff to do. it's an extra work and some storage. I'm not a hater on it by any means. I'm not saying it's wrong or incorrect.
And here's a little literary foreshadowing, right? In the tactical crowd, anyone who hangs out on Tactical Tangents has probably seen some Facebook pages and some chats about, arguing over gun stuff. If you think gun stuff gets feisty, you should see dog people arguing about like what to feed their dogs or how to train their dogs. And people get very emotional about that, right? So we're going to talk about dog training in this episode, by the way, and like buckle up because we're going to talk about some stuff. And you may agree, you may disagree. That's cool. We'll talk about it in the comments, right? other kind of fun things. There's lore on the military working dog side about canines sometimes getting titanium fangs, like they'll wear down their teeth and they get like metal fangs instead. Do you have any of that on your team?
We don't. We haven't found it to be necessary. Some agencies have. It's just an implant. It's like a tooth, but it's artificial, and so they happen to be metal. So when they do that, it's just because they're pulling a tooth and they're putting an implant there as a replacement. We've had dogs with as few as like one canine, and that can affect their ability to hold on to things, and so that's where that could probably play a role. But if they lose a canine or two, it's not the end of the world.
What happens when a police dog retires? And I think that hopefully over time people figured out that they're not just thrown away or euthanized usually. But what happens when a police dog's done working?
Yeah, so everything that we talk about in this episode is obviously kind of specific to my experience and my agency and the way that we do things. But at my agency, when the dog retires, the handler has the option to keep the dog, and basically we've got to buy the dog from the city for $1 so that there's some transaction. It's kind of a formality thing, but the dog will live out their retirement with us, and they'll be part of our families. Now, as you can imagine, not terribly unlike any police or military veteran that does this for long enough. It's a hard life. I mean, they've got some miles. And so by the time they retire, they generally don't have a whole ton of time left to live out, but some last longer than others. And so they can just be normal dogs at that point, but it just depends from dog to dog and family to family.
So if I'm a civilian, I'm interested in personal defense, should I invest in a guard dog? And if so, what does that really mean? Like, should I just go find the biggest a-hole I can at a shelter? Or like, do I need to go pay $10,000 to like a boutique in East Prussia for an everyday carry dog? Like what constitutes a guard dog in your mind based on your experience with working dogs?
Well, I could tell you as an agency that gets a lot of work as far as the canine stuff goes, I've gotten the opportunity to work around other agencies that have dogs but don't get to use them very much. And I can tell you that the lack of experience is a liability, and not just on the policing side of things. I mean, it's a lot of work to maintain and to have a dog that is arguably dangerous in certain circumstances and not have any idea of how to manage that. And so you got to be honest with yourself about what you're willing to undertake. I'm not saying that there aren't I'm not saying that someday when I retire, I'm not going to have a dog that's like ready to whip some ass if I ask him to. But at the same time, I also know that getting a dog there where just he's going to do exactly what I want when I want it and not any other time, not only is it going to cost that $10,000 or $12,000 just to get in the door, right? But it also takes years of work. My dog is in a great spot right now. He's 8 years old. He's doing awesome. He's getting ready to retire, right? But that didn't happen overnight. It took all those years to get there. So my advice would be, and again, this is for entertainment purposes, and we are not giving any kind of professional advice here. So take your own risk accordingly, but be real honest with yourself about what you're asking that dog to do. If you get a dog that's just an a-hole, he's probably always going to be an a-hole. And are you prepared to deal with the consequences? Are your kids, are your neighbors, is your spouse, all of those things, those all get a vote, right? It's not just like, oh, I have this really badass dog. He'll bite anything that comes in within a quarter mile of my house. There's some baggage that comes with it potentially, right? So just have some solid criteria about what your expectations are before you get into something like that.
I like that. And one of the things that I would offer is think about what you need that dog to really do. Does the dog need to fight on your behalf? That is one type of dog. Does the dog need to bark and alert you that someone is coming through your door? That's a different type of dog. That might be a Chihuahua. I hate Chihuahuas, but that might be a Chihuahua that
They're noisy.
that does that job well for you.
They
right?
accomplish that.
So start with your requirement, work backwards would be my biggest suggestion. So now we're getting in the meat, boys and girls. Big picture, Mike. What should anybody understand about dog training?
So, Jim, you mentioned this, but we have a saying that the only thing that two dog trainers can agree on is that the third is an idiot. And it's because there are so many methods to do this, and there have been working dogs or protection dogs or guard dogs or just domesticated dogs in some form for thousands of years, right?
Yeah, as soon as dogs figured out we had meat in a campfire, they started training us, and we started training them, and we all lived happily ever after, right?
Not only that, but dogs are pack animals, and so they kind of yearn for that symbiotic relationship where we depend on each other for survival. That's just part of their evolution. It's arguably a big part of our evolution, right? And I remember my wife and I we went to Europe one time. We went to Italy, and we went to Pompeii, and we saw the little beware of dog thing on the ground from Pompeii from 2,000 years ago that kind of illustrates people using dogs as a protection tool. So it's nothing new, right? And so there's been thousands of ways to teach dogs to do things that we want them to do, and which one is best depends heavily on that individual dog and the individual trainer or handler. And sometimes those aren't always the same people, right? The handler and the trainer might not be the same person. So we have to make a lot of assumptions in that. And so there's a lot of different methods and different ways that you can approach a problem. There are certain things that a handler has to be able to do well, like consistent timing in corrections and in giving rewards or other kinds of punishment. Sometimes withholding a reward is a form of punishment with a dog. And you have to be able to time that well. And if you have a handler who can't time that well, then that's going to change the way you have to approach that. Sometimes if you have to give a correction to a dog, maybe you're working with someone who is young or elderly and just not physically that strong, and they have a dog who is a little bit big for them. And the best illustration of this is like going to SeaWorld, and they've got the orca whales, right? You can't put a prong collar around a whale or a dolphin when you train them how to do things. You have to use different methods. So the idea here is that there's a lot of different strategies and techniques, and you might have to change things up. Some might not work well for certain dogs or certain handlers. And so there's more than one way to do this. And that's probably the biggest thing that people have to understand. Related to the types of dogs that you have, you might have certain dogs that if you overcorrect them or you punish them and they are very reactive, you will create other behaviors that you don't want, right? So maybe they'll get super anxious or they'll get stressed out, or maybe you'll end up wearing that dog, right? They're going to come up the leash at you, and now you're in the hospital, and maybe the dog gets put down, and that's not fair or appropriate if it's something that you started, right? It's a fight that you started, essentially.
And I want to emphasize that real quick. Bad decision making with buying and training and managing dogs, the dog's going to pay the bill for your mistakes. And that is responsibility that some people take seriously and some people don't. The dog is going to pay the bill for your mistakes, and maybe a kid.
And that's right. That's the big one, is what if it's somebody else, right? Like, yeah, it's one thing if you get bit. And there's a psychological thing that comes with this, right? This is a whole, and you mentioned this in the intro, Jim, but people are just kind of naturally afraid of getting bit by a dog. And having been bit and sent to the hospital a number of times, I can tell you it's not really that big of a deal. There's some stuff that comes with that, but in the moment versus the aftermath, right? Yeah. It's not really that big of a deal, but you have to recognize that, like, it's like if I bite another cop, he'll probably be okay. But if he gets him in the hand or something, could that cause something that can, an injury? Could that cause an injury that could put his career in jeopardy? So there's a lot at stake here potentially. And more importantly, I would assume for most people that get into this, that they are generally a fan of dogs. And I don't want to see more dogs get killed because people can't be mature about their risk decisions or their own patience and ability to do the training.
I like that.
So this brings up another saying that we say often in my little circle, and that is that every time you solve one problem, you create a new one. So yeah, your dog's not chewing on your shoes anymore, but he's terrified of you and he trembles in the corner when you come around. Great work, bud. You did awesome. That's not success, right? That's not what success looks like. And so you just have to be aware that these are living animals and there's going to be ups and downs and there's a learning curve. And you're talking about shaping behavior. At the end of the day, you are shaping the behavior of this animal in a way that you cannot communicate with them the way me and Jim can communicate through a problem, right? So there's a lot of it depends that comes with this as an episode. And we're trying to kind of educate you a little bit and entertain you a little bit, but just understand that we're not giving you hard advice here. We're just saying it depends. Here's some ideas. And if you need real advice, it should come from a professional who can see you and see the dog and help you with what you're trying to accomplish kind of with their feet on the ground, if that makes sense.
I like that. And you're going to notice some patterns here. Like Mike just talked about, working with a dog is strongly related to leadership. And in fact, in very many ways, that's exactly what this is. It's leadership, right? You have to communicate with the dog. You got to motivate the dog. You have to teach the dog what it is you want and set expectations and then enforce those expectations. This is leadership stuff. And my experience is the people who do the best with dogs also tend to do the best with people.
Yeah, I don't know if I can echo that. Dog people tend to have a certain kind of personality that can be...
That's fair.
But generally
there's some people
speaking,
who should only interact with dogs. That is true. And there's some people who should never interact with dogs. I'll buy that. But there's connections here, right?
Yeah. And so about the leadership thing, one of the most common things that people do that I think is a mistake is they want to send their dog off to obedience school. They
go fix my dog.
Yeah, like, here you go. Here's my dog. I expect him to come home in 3 weeks and he's going to be an angel, right? Like you're missing a really big point about what dogs are and do. And that has to do with dogs being pack animals. In all packs have a hierarchy, right? That's just a fact of life. For dogs, there is a rank. And whether or not you subscribe to that, despite whatever your feelings about politics are, or your interactions with other people at work or within your household, dogs do not see things the way people see things. They are animals. And in their world, there is a hierarchy. So wrap your head around that. I'll give you a minute. But sending your dog off to obedience school and having someone else whip your dog's ass into shape is not going to do the same thing as you training and teaching and enforcing certain boundaries, rules, and limitations with your dog in your house. That's not the same thing, right? So yeah, you can send your dog off somewhere. They can do some training. They can habituate certain things with the dog. You have to maintain that, but importantly, there's a relationship between you and your dog, no matter what. And your dog will read you like a book. One thing they are very, very good at is reading your body language. And this is something that if you've ever owned a dog, you can attest to this. How does your dog behave when you walk over to the food container where their dog food is? And they start to lose their mind, right? They understand context. They understand body language. And if you don't start to understand those things, you're going to have a real hard time getting that dog to behave a certain way or do things that you want.
Yeah, dogs aren't stupid. At least most of them aren't. They always have a hierarchy. That is true. And my experience with them is there's a saying in the code of conduct for the military that if I am senior, I will take command. If not, I will obey the lawful orders of those appointed over me. Like, my dogs understood that from day one. And if I don't take command, they do. Right? Because that is how they're wired.
Yep.
And that will never change. And that doesn't mean I have to be a jerk and dominate them or whatever, but they know I need to be in charge. And if I'm not in charge, they're going to take charge.
Yeah.
Right. And if you've ever watched like The Dog Whisperer on TV, one of the things you're going to pick up pretty quickly is that most dog training is really owner or handler training, right? Like you yourself have to figure this stuff out. It's not like you can just like buy dog training on Amazon, all of a sudden your dog's going to be awesome. Like, it just doesn't work that way, right?
And that the important thing to wrap your head around there too is that you are learning as well. And so you're going to make mistakes, and you're kind of, I don't want to say asking your dog for a little bit of slack, right? But there's going to be ups and downs, and it is not a linear thing. So as you start to work through certain problems with your dog, there are going to be things that you have to keep working on and that keep coming up, right? And people struggle with this because they tend to assign a lot of human emotions to the way that dogs think. They think that they identify things the dog likes and that the dog doesn't like, and they talk a good game about the way their dogs interact with the world. The thing is, dogs are not human. They don't think like us. And when your dog does silly things, this is kind of what Jim is saying, when your dog does some silly behavior that you kind of condition them to do and they get a treat, they do those behaviors because the dummy at the other end of the leash is giving them, the treat dispenser is giving them treats when they do it. So who's training who there, right? And I want to back up and also talk about the obedience thing and saying like, oh, you can go whoop his ass into shape, right? And it's not about beating your dog into submission or compliance. That's not what we're talking about here either. But what we are talking about is structure. And you want structure, especially with a working dog. You need a level of control over that dog because you know they have the ability and the tendency towards aggression. So that is required that you have some level of control. When handler
says let go, you let go.
Yeah.
Right.
At the same time, with your pet dog, that structure and that level of compliance could save his life, right? He's running out into the street to chase a ball and there's a car coming and you recall him and you say, come here. And he does it because he knows you're going to enforce that request or that command, right? And the idea there is that like doing so might save his life. So it's not about beating your dog into submission or anything compulsive like that. We're not about that. We're not for that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the idea is understanding that they need structure, and you have to find this balance between motivating the dog and disciplining the dog, just like in a lot of ways you have to do with kids. In fact, one of the analogies or the commonalities between dogs and kids is a repeatable concept in psychology. There's actually two that are big, called operant conditioning and classical conditioning. And these are huge.
Making my nerd sense spike with that. All right, so basic psych tells us that all organisms have automatic physiological reactions to stimulus, as in your body reacts to things you sense, right? You see a hot girl, your body reacts. You see a hot guy, your body reacts, whatever, right? You see food, your body reacts. It was first documented in Pavlov's study. You've heard of Pavlov's dogs? Well, here we are, where dogs started salivating and their stomachs started doing stomach things when an attendant walked into a room, and it happened that there was like a bell on the door. So every time the attendant walked into the room, the bell happened to ring. It wasn't really on purpose, as my understanding. And they noticed that the dogs knew they were getting fed way before they were actually getting fed. Right? So organisms connect sensation to stimulus to reactions, sometimes without even thinking about it, right? That was developed further by a guy named Dr. B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner is the father of operant conditioning. And he took that further, and he did most of his tests with pigeons. I don't know. He's a bird guy. I don't know. And he started studying how pigeons could like peck a lever or turn in a circle to get a reward. And then he went past that. And he started changing the amount of the reward and how quickly the reward was delivered after the pigeon pecked a lever or turned in a circle. And he figured out if you could get that dialed in just right, you could get the pigeon to do like long division, right? And you could change the reliability of the reward, right? If you changed how often the reward actually pops up based on how many lever pecks, that sort of thing. Much like a slot machine in Vegas, right? It doesn't always pay out, but it pays out just often enough to keep you doing it.
Yep.
That's operant conditioning. And organisms will make choices compulsively in some cases to get a reward as soon as they like figure out the game. And they will do things to avoid punishment as soon as they figure out what gets them punished. So this is the basis of learning. This is the basis of all training in the military. All training in law enforcement is conditioning you to react to a stimulus. You hear gunshots, you do what? Right? You get a bullet hole in your leg. You do what? The drill sergeant walks in and says, "Room, tench, hut." You do what, right? It's reaction to a stimulus. And that doesn't change between click treat for a dog or you coming to attention or you doing, battle drill alpha for react to contact.
Yep. So this is standard across not only humans, but also dogs. And the two things that I want to boil down for you in terms of what Jim just said is that classical conditioning has to do with a response to a stimulus that was previously neutral to the organism. So your dog doesn't understand what sit or lay down or let go or go to your crate. They don't
speak English.
Turns out they're just sounds, right? It is a neutral stimulus, just like the bell that rings before they eat. But they build an association between that stimulus and some other thing that is relevant to their needs or survival. Right? In the case of Pavlov's bell or Pavlov's dogs, food, right? It can also be a toy, a reward, a game. Those things, in a sense, are still part of the motivational makeup of your dog. Operant conditioning has to do with strengthening behaviors or making them extinguish or reduce or diminish, I think is the correct word. So, I tell my dog a command, that's a neutral thing. I teach him what that means, and then I want to make that more and more reliable. So I drive up the level of distraction and stuff like that, and I use rewards or punishments to either strengthen or otherwise reinforce those behaviors. And there's different ways, a punishment that maybe I can apply a correction if he doesn't listen. I give him a reward if he does listen. I withhold a reward if he doesn't listen. There's different ways, there's different kind of styles to that, depending on what phase of training that you're in. But you have to understand that these apply both with people and also with dogs. Now, the big thing to take away from this, as far as punishments and rewards are concerned, is that timing matters a whole lot. So the classic one of this is like, you leave your dogs out in your house when you leave for work, and you come home and they shit on the carpet. And then people come home and they take their dog and they rub their face in the shit as like some kind of punishment. Like they probably shit on the carpet 3 hours ago, and now you're over here yelling and pissed off at the dog, rubbing his face in a pile of shit. The dog doesn't know what the fuck that means, right? Like your dog doesn't understand.
They just know you're an a-hole. That's the only thing they associated right there is you and being an a-hole.
Yeah. So that association, no connection there, right? Timing matters a whole lot. And so making sure that you make an association between that punishment or that reward to reinforce or reduce a behavior, that's important, and that's kind of on you. And we'll talk about how to get into that in a little bit. Speaking of behaviors, before we get into the training stuff specifically, let's talk about some ways that dogs behave. depending on what book you read, there are something like 10 or 15 types of drive in a dog, and to an extent, a related aggression in a dog. And if you can understand these, they're useful because they help you understand why your dog might behave a certain way. They also help you work around them if there are problematic behaviors that you're trying to either get rid of or just avoid. And you can also use them to motivate them for training. And this is kind of like that Maslow's hierarchy thing that we use in humans as well.
Yeah. Kind of circling back to that operant conditioning with Skinner thing. A classic legend about Dr. Skinner is a grad student once asked him, what a pigeon was thinking when it spun in a circle and pecked a lever to get some bird seed. And what's going through that pigeon's mind? And B.F. Skinner kind of scoffed. He's like, I don't care. Pigeons don't think, they behave, right? The only thing I care about is what I can see. And what I care about from the dog is what can I see? What is the dog actually doing? I don't need to know it's psyche or what it's, how it was damaged in its childhood, little doggy puppyhood. I need to know right now, is the dog associating my stimulus to a response?
There's kind of some objectivity to that, right? Because we can't get in their heads the way that we can get in another human's head by communicating, right? So Maslow's hierarchy, we did a whole episode on that, if you guys are interested, if you haven't heard that one. We talk about some of the ways that human needs are used to motivate people and also to help them grow. And if you look at these types of drives in a dog, and also the kinds of aggression in a dog, you'll understand a little bit about the same pyramid, if you will, of what gets a dog to behave a certain way, right? So we know that dogs have an innate desire to chase things. And it isn't because they love you and they want to play with you. It's because they want to fill their mouth, because that is how they eat, and that is how they live. They eat things, they live, so when their mouth is full, they are happy. That's just the psychology behind it, right? Now, there is something to be said about playing and the relationship building between you and an animal. Dogs do have a desire to play, but it is inferior in the pyramid of needs to a dog than their desire to chase their food, if that makes sense. So that being said, what you need to understand about drives in a dog and that whole thing about I said how dogs are pack animals, they work in groups, right? They live and they work in groups, is that everything that they do, those behaviors are somehow linked to their survival. And so in the chain of survival, eating is kind of a big deal. Filling their mouth and motivating them is one thing. There is also that social standing that comes with dogs, just like with people, right? People need to eat, they need shelter and security and food and water and those things, right? But then they also need to have that sense of social belonging and family and self-esteem and all those things. So there is still a social drive in dogs, and where this comes up is like that whole rank thing that we talked about. So in survival for dogs, to be part of a pack, all packs have a rank. And so at some point we have to work out that rank. The reason this is important is because if you and your dog are out at, I don't know, let's just say a neighborhood walk. You're walking around the neighborhood and you have your dog really well trained to respond to, a clicker and treats. And some strange dog comes walking by and your dog gets spooked, right? Your dog starts to bark and get all pissed off and you're like, but I have the treats. Well, in your dog's mind, this is no time to eat. There's a threat. There's a bad guy over there that is threatening our very survival, right? And your dog needs to see you as the one that detects the threats and the survival. So we're not going to like deep dive every single kind of drive and motivation in a dog, but what you have to understand is that they're there, and you have to kind of figure out for your dog what's making them tick in that moment. Is it
Mom's not protecting us from the mailman, so I will.
yeah. So exactly. So is it that, oh, I want to eat right now, or I want to play, or I want to chase things, or is it someone is approaching the house or the yard, or is it this person is a threat to our survival, or is it the dog thinks that he is in charge? It's like the movie Batman. My first working dog's name was Bane, and that movie Batman where you had Bane in there and he said, "Do you feel in charge?" Relevant.
And a natural question in a lot of this is, how much does breed matter? We talked about that a little bit up front, right? You probably noticed that golden retrievers tend to have a different drive profile than pit bulls. Often, but not always. Hold that thought as Mike goes. The breeds and the types within the breeds that end up being working dogs tend to be really, really high drive, right? So they've got these things set up, like I said, kind of at like a 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10. And if you're going to be a handler or a trainer in that environment, you have to be really, really tuned into this stuff, because it can be dangerous if you don't manage it well.
Yep. And this is, so understanding that dogs have personalities, breeds, again, you can make those generalizations, but the personality of every dog, you're going to have more or less of those things, right? Some dogs are going to be more dominant and overbearing. Some dogs are going to be more naturally just submissive, go with the flow types. All dogs are going to want some level of connection with other people or things. And so this should sound a lot like other humans, right? We all want connection, right?
Aw.
Some people are going to be more over the top, more about themselves, more dominant. Other people, not so much. And as far as pack animals go, if the strength of the wolf is the pack and the strength of the pack is the wolf and all of that, it's just important to understand that those instincts will rear their heads at various times during our training, right? So this is where we talk about things like, should we correct our dogs? Or should we use only positive motivation techniques when we train our dogs? Some people are really, really against giving corrections or other kinds of punishment to their dogs. But the point is, with certain dogs who are a little bit more, sharp, a little bit more dominant, that dog is going to need a strong handler and someone that can assume that top of the pyramid kind of role. And that might mean some punishments and corrections. Not all dogs will need that. That's okay. But you have to understand that it does play a role in this, and it does have its place. And to be super clear, that is not to say that with every strong, assertive dog, compulsion or just whipping his ass into submission is the way to go either. Some trainers are like that. Some people believe in that. It's worked in the past. It's kind of old school, and it has its place in some people's minds.
And this has evolved a lot, right?
Yeah.
Even over the last 20 years, we have figured out a lot about dog training. And I remember distinctly seeing videos of yank and crank style dog training. Hey, dog's not doing what he needs to, pop that leash. And just like Mike's saying, that there are conditions under which that may actually make some sense, but you need to do it on purpose and under control and dialed into that dog and that dog's personality and what exactly you're trying to accomplish, right? Do it with a goal, do it with a plan.
And the problem with overdoing this, so there's certain things. There's a really good article. If you go to Learberg.com, we'll put links. I'll have a whole bunch of links for you to go with this episode. But Learberg.com has an article on the theory of corrections in dog training. And it's very good at laying out times that you should correct the dog and times you shouldn't. And there's certain behaviors that you shouldn't correct the dog for not doing if you haven't taught them how to do it, right? And so if it's a pack-related behavior where this dog is sending you a message that like he's the boss of you, then that might be one thing. But that's different than I'm telling my dog to go to his crate and he's not listening to me. Like he doesn't know what you're telling him, right? So just understand that corrections and punishments have their place, but what we're not suggesting is you just whoop your dog's ass into submission. That's not what this is. And doing that comes with baggage, right? If you just create a dog whose only motivation is fear of getting injured or hurt in his mind, at best, you're going to get a dog that's scared of you and doesn't like you and on edge all the time. And at worst, you're going to find yourself in a fight that you can't win. And that's not a great place to be. So compulsion only methods, kind of old school, not saying they don't work. They worked in the past, but there's a better way is what I would say. And there's a better way, and you should still layer in corrections and punishments when the time is right, but don't start there. If you get a dog who is strong and assertive and you find yourself in a contest of strength or will, you're probably doing something wrong, up to and including choosing the wrong dog. All that being said, if you're using only positive methods to teach your dog stuff, you're relying on things that are low stress, right? That are basically the dog's doing things because he wants to. You're offering an incentive, but you're not really challenging the dog on his willpower. The problem with that is you lose reliability when you start to come down a peg on that hierarchy of survival needs for the dog, right? So let's say, for example, the dog is chasing a ball into the street. I've used that one a couple times. Chasing a ball into the street is low stress for the dog. If you think about like a dog going after a rabbit or a squirrel, there's not a big fight at the end, right? The dog just grabs the rabbit or the squirrel. The rabbit or the squirrel like kicks and screams and tries to get away and acts a lot like little kids do, which I'll talk about in a minute. But that prey drive for the dog is low stress. It's just dog's just doing his thing. That is going to be overridden by a dog that is being challenged by an intruder, right? By a strange pack or a strange dog. And so when you're telling your dog, come here, buddy, and I'll give you this toy as a reward, the dog's like, F the toy, there's bigger things at stake here. And that is when you need your dog to be like, no, you need to worry about me more than those other things because I decide what things we need to fight, right? So
that's an important point. There's several real important points in what Mike just said. One of the most important things is only I decide when we fight. That's part of you're the alpha dog.
Right.
Part of being the alpha dog is you decide when there's going to be violence.
Yes. Right. And it's a pack leadership thing, right? Like dogs work in packs. Packs have hierarchies. Hierarchies have leaders, right? And if you are the leader of the pack, you decide what things are threatening or not threatening, who you're going to let in or not let in, and when it's time to fight or not fight. And that's a relationship that you have to establish with your dog. And there's a social way of doing that in terms of playing with your dog and all the sources of good things come from you. And so your dog respects and likes you because you bring all the fun to his or her world. That's cool. But understand that like those positive only methods are only tapping into some of those drive states. And that is ultimately what we're talking about here. And that is manipulating the state of drive in the dog. So with a police dog, for example, this is a common thing that we have to constantly, we're bouncing back and forth, right? I need to be able to turn my dog on, so to speak, and turn him off. I need to be able to change gears. Hey, we're going to go look for a bad guy, hunt a bad guy, or we're going to fight a bad guy. Those are different. Understand, those are different things for the dog, right? Getting in a fight is a different thing than going to find a bunny rabbit, right? The guy that ran from the cops and is now hiding. think about the body language between a hiding bad guy, probably low to the ground, probably blading his position towards you, probably facing away from you or hiding his face, right? As opposed to a guy that wants to fight, who is big and tall and scary and has his arms out to his side and is puffing his chest and showing his teeth and is facing you head on. Dogs are experts at reading body language. And those states of the person, just of the suspect in the context of a police dog, those state of minds are different. And the same is true for the dog, right? So we're constantly changing the drive state for the dog. So when you're training a dog, you have to understand that you might have to switch gears from one to the other. And the way that you communicate with your dog in that gear is going to be different, right? Certain things, give them a treat. Certain things, give them a toy. Certain things, maybe pop them on the leash, right? Maybe give them a correction. Certain things, remove him from the situation and don't let it be a factor to begin with. All right, so let's talk about picking a dog. I talked about in the beginning some of those characteristics, like the stuff between a working dog and a pet. I think that's helpful. The Maslow's hierarchy thing, I don't necessarily think that you have to have like a full understanding of every, the 14 types of aggression in dogs and different drives and all of that. But I do think that actually sitting down and writing out what you want in your dog will go a long way. And it sounds silly, but when you actually go out and you look for a dog with those things in mind, just having 4 or 5 characteristics or traits written down, it'll go a long way in terms of like narrowing the scope of your search. If you want a dog that's a hunting dog, then that's going to be different than you want a dog who is just a companion lap dog that you can cuddle with and that makes your kids happy. If you want a real active dog that is you could take on runs and go hiking with, that's going to be a little bit different than maybe a dog that you just want as a solo companion. Maybe you're single, maybe you live alone and you just want someone that can, be in your space together with on a regular basis. So sketching that out, it has value. And this is not unlike hiring a human for any given thing, right? Like People Ideas Hardware, selecting a dog is not really any different. You can train the dog to do whatever you want if you select the right dog for the task. So before you go over to the shelter or to the pound or wherever it is that you're going to buy a dog, you've written down these things and you start getting dogs out that you kind of like. They look cool, right? That you think their energy level is about right. You get a good vibe from them. And you take them out and you start doing the things that you plan on doing with them. Maybe you take them for a walk. Maybe you play a game with them. Maybe you see if they want to chase things. Maybe you see if they're an a-hole. Maybe you walk them past other dogs and you see how they react to other dogs. Those are all things that you can do. I had this happen one time. My wife our oldest pet dog was really connected with me because at the time that we got her, we lived in an apartment and I did all the training and the dog was close to me because I built that relationship with her, right? Like I did the training and taught her stuff. And so she kind of wanted to be more around me than anybody else. And my wife wanted a dog that was a little bit more for her, And so we talked about getting another dog. And the first dog that she looked at was this shepherd mix. And she was kind of aloof, curious, constantly looking directions other than us. She was interested in what's going on around her, but she was obviously pretty independent, didn't really want a whole lot to do with us. And she really liked this dog, but I had to kind of remind her like, hey, this dog is probably a cool dog. I mean, she'd make a great companion.
It's just not that into you.
Yeah. She'd probably make a cool dog for certain things. Like if you lived alone, maybe a single household, and this was going to be it. Like, because again, dogs want that connection, but and a dog like that will tend to be very loyal. Like once you've made that connection, it's strong, right? But probably a one handler kind of dog. And what you're looking for is a dog that's just kind of constantly, affectionate and kind of an attention hound. And that's what we ended up getting. There was a different dog who constantly wants to cuddle up in her lap and do that sort of thing. So have an idea, go into it with that state of mind, and don't just get a dog because they look cool and you think you're set on having a German Shepherd, because that's going to set you up for failure. Some of the things that you can look for when you're picking a dog is in their body language. And I kind of talked about this. Dogs are already reading your body language. They're very good at this, right? And you can read their body language as well. And you should be paying attention to their body language, especially when you start getting them out of their element or out of their comfort zone. You should see kind of what signals they're sending. There's a lot of insight that you can gather if you pay attention to it. One is how they hold their head and their ears. And I mentioned that shepherd mix that my wife was looking at was very curious about her surroundings, and her ears were always up. She was always looking around. How they hold their head and what they're doing with their ears can tell you a lot. If they're cautious and they're cowering, that's one thing. Their tail is a big one. So if they hold their tail up high or they tuck it between their legs, if it's moving a lot, you can kind of tell how much energy, what energy state they're in, and how confident or assertive or comfortable they're feeling. And then their body posture. If they're standing tall, if they're coming at you head on versus if they're kind of coming at you sideways or they're blading their stance towards you. Those are all things that you can kind of pay attention to get some stuff. So again, their head and their ears is one area. Their tail, both the height of it and how much it's moving, and also their body axis or their posture. Those are interesting things you can pay attention to in certain environments. If you see them doing things like if they get in kind of that aggressive state where you're not sure what their issue is, one thing a lot of dogs will do that you've probably seen is they'll put their hackles up or they'll start baring their teeth. Those are signs of aggression, but they're actually also a subtle lack of confidence. A lot of times dogs that are doing that are showing themselves to kind of make them look bigger than they really are or scarier than they really are. And so you can interpret that as kind of an unsure feeling, right? Like there's a little bit of aggression there, but they seem a little unsure and not sure what to make of this.
Like wearing a tap out t-shirt.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
Molon Labe.
Yeah.
Right.
So you can use body language as well. And if you think about those things as far as like how much you're moving around, that can affect the energy state of your dog. If you're trying to get them to engage with you and play, you might move around a lot, and they might kind of adapt that high energy state. Your tone of voice, you've probably heard dogs that have like a happy bark or a something is wrong, there's an intruder bark, or a ouch, that hurts bark. Your tone of voice can convey similar emotions and feelings to your dogs.
Yeah, this is big in my house. Clickers are really popular because they work, right? You're connecting stimulus to a reward. I don't always have a clicker on me, so I use my voice. I run into trouble being consistent with using voice across all the members of my household. I'm big on using my voice. My spouse is less so. And self-awareness is a big part of leadership, and it's a big part of dog training. You need to know how you are coming across the dog and how the dog's going to interpret you. If a dog's acting like an a-hole and you use a soothing voice and you pet him on the head to soothe him, is it actually soothing him, or is it rewarding him with pets and a warm, fuzzy voice for acting like an a-hole? And is that a behavior you're going to extinguish doing that? Or is it when you're going to amplify doing that? Right? So I try to be very, very sensitive to what voice I'm projecting, and I try to manage what voice every member of my family is projecting to the dogs, both in body language and in actual spoken voice.
Yeah, and this is going to get into a concept when we start talking about marker training a little bit. That's going to matter a whole lot. But before we get there, I want to cover, I think, two other philosophical points that I think are important. One is a recipe for success that I stole from Cesar Millan, of all places.
The dog whisperer.
Yep,
Yes.
the dog whisperer. And, you know, a lot of dog trainers out there will, you know, talk shit and make fun of him or whatever. But, you know, he's figured some stuff out. Turns out he's obviously pretty successful. And his kind of formula for success is exercise, discipline, and affection in that order. You need to help your dog blow off some steam, and exercise can go a long way to have a well-behaved dog. That's a fact of life. 100% true. When my dog's been working all week, he is way better behaved. He listens more. That's a fact. Also, like we've mentioned, dogs need structure and discipline. They don't need to be perfectly obedient, but they do need rules, boundaries, and limitations. And that is something that you have to establish and consistently enforce. And so figure out what those are. Maybe it's dogs don't get up on the furniture. Maybe it's dogs don't get to just eat whatever they want. Maybe it's dogs will listen when they're told something to do. Whatever they are, have them, be consistent with them, and make sure that your dog has that structure. It's important for building that pack leadership mentality within your dog's household, right? And remember, it's his household, obviously. I'm kidding. It's not. It's yours. So the last thing is you have to have a relationship with your dog. There's a reason that you catch dogs cuddling up on a dog bed in the winter, and they keep each other warm, and it's all about survival and blah, blah, blah. They don't understand the difference. So you should have some affection for your dog. You should have a relationship with your dog. Closeness matters on some level. I'm not saying your dog should sleep in your bed with you. In fact, I'm pretty adamantly against that. It's annoying.
We're not judging if you do.
Right.
Not our style.
Right. Not at all. But having a relationship with your dog is important. And so the affection does play a role at some point because you are trying to have some sort of relationship with that animal. Now, it could be a professional relationship. My working dog.
We're just two guys who work at a dry cleaners.
My working dog, not super affectionate. That's probably not the right word I would use to describe our relationship by any stretch. But he's my buddy, and we have a relationship, and it is what it is. It's a working relationship, but it is one. Last thing before we get into the training specific stuff is a concept called management. Here's the thing. A lot like kids, dogs will be dogs. They're gonna find trouble. And they have their own sets of behaviors, both good, desirable behaviors and undesirable, bad behaviors that we have to manage. They're gonna chew on stuff. They're gonna pee and poop on stuff. They're gonna get into shit. It's just what they do. If you want a well-behaved dog, you have to understand that there are certain things that you have to manage about them and their environment to prevent the outcomes that you don't want. This is where putting your dog in a crate or a kennel is a good place to start. You can teach your dog to go into a crate and a kennel and actually like it, and it's not a bad thing. But you need to challenge your assumptions about their ability to escape or destroy those things. And you have to control the things that they have access to. If you don't want them to destroy something, to include a child or another animal or whatever, then don't let them have access to it. Physically prevent that from being an option available.
Oh, this episode is going to rustle some jimmies. This is going to be maybe our most controversial episode we've ever had. We talk about like correcting a dog, not letting it sleep in your bed, putting in a crate,
A-holes.
like an animal. So crating is one of the most misunderstood things in dog training. Most dogs are den animals. They like crates and they get used to them really quickly, in my experience. And not a dog handler. I've had a lot of dogs. My dogs go out of their way to hang out in their crates. Especially my girl dog. It's 9:00 at night. She's like, okay, it's time to go to bed, and she'll just go roll up in her crate. And this is a key thing in personal defense. I have dogs. Me, Jim, I have dogs for the purpose of alerting me. That's their function in my house. Then they're warm and fuzzy, and I like dogs. But from a personal defense prepper standpoint, that's their function, is to tell me if someone's coming through the window at 3 a.m. I'm a reasonably heavy sleeper. I need to know that. I don't need my dog to go fight that guy. I need my dog to wake me up. And with that risk management posture, that dog can do that from a crate. So that's what I'm going to do.
Yep. And they'll also not get into the pantry and chew up your couch cushions and
all over the place.
Go shit on stuff and whatever. So just understand if there are certain bad outcomes that you're trying to avoid, just physically prevent that from being an option. There's going to be times and places where, like, my dog just shouldn't be around. If I don't trust my dog around kids, he's just not going to be around kids. Period. That's it, right? Just, I keep them separate. If my dog is dog aggressive, he doesn't go around other dogs. As the responsible, mature adult, I just prevent that from ever being a factor. So think about that in terms of management. If you're going to train something, that's fine. You can train it incrementally in situations and circumstances that you can control by managing those bad outcomes and preventing it from being a bigger issue. And this is especially true if, like, here's the deal. Once a dog gets away with it once, it's you got an uphill battle, man.
They have made a connection.
So,
right?
Don't let it happen the first time. You can control that. So ways you can train and control your dog. Keeping your dog on a leash, even like a long leash, like a drag line, can go a long way in being able to not only physically control your dog, but also like psychologically control your dog. When he realizes that you have a method of getting a hold of him, that can help.
And this sounds real domineering, but again, that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
Right? Dogs have a hierarchy.
And I got to be clear, again, I'm a big fan of motivational positive training, but I follow that up with a disciplined approach. So it's kind of a blended thing. I don't just use compulsive, punishment-based, fear-based, pain-based training in dogs. I do not believe in that at all. Totally against that. But you need to understand that dogs understand strength. And you can motivate and train and positively reinforce good behaviors in dogs, but there is always going to be a time and a place where you set a boundary and you must enforce that boundary. And this is important because it can not only save your dog's life, but it can also save you from getting injured, your kids from getting injured, another dog from getting injured, etc. So that being said, let's talk about collars. I'm not going to push you in one direction or another. The only thing I'll really say about collars is like the ones that go around their nose. I think those are dumb. I'm not saying they don't work for some dogs. That's fine if that's your thing, like whatever. I just think it's not my thing. I will say that prong collars have a really bad reputation. People think prong collars look vicious and scary, and I totally disagree with that. They require a lot less force, and a lot of people interpret them as power steering for dogs because you can get a lot more output with a lot less input, if that makes sense. So I think prong collars are something that you should consider. The thing about prong collars you have to know is that they have a tendency to come apart at the worst times possible. So you kind of have to have a backup. So either a slip lead or a flat collar that can also be on the dog as a backup in case it comes apart. A lot of people in the past have used choke chains or some variety of choke chain. I think they're kind of meh. My dog wears one, but it's only because I can, like, literally with my eyes closed, I can clip my dog's leash onto his collar anywhere on that chain and have him under some form of control. So if I got to get out of the car in a hurry to go chase a guy down that bails out of a pursuit or whatever, I don't have to find like the D ring on a bigger collar. I can just grab it anywhere and hook a chain to it. But I don't use it as the choke chain as it's originally intended to be able to apply corrections. First of all, the choke chains have a tendency of applying all the force in one spot, which is not good for the dog's neck in the long run. And they also require a lot more force to get a reaction out of the dog. And so you're really putting more stress and pressure on the dog than you need to. The last big one is e-collars, electric collars. Big fan of electric collars. I use it literally every single day. They're real easy to overuse or misuse though. And so if you're going to use one, get some training, seek some professional help from someone that's reputable, because they're probably the most misused dog tool out there.
And misunderstood. I mean, there's a public conception that remote collar is all about zapping the snot out of the dog.
Yeah.
And
yeah, they think it's like a
experience
taser.
with it is, my experience with it's like the opposite of that.
Yeah.
You dial it down as low as you possibly can, and it's about that immediacy thing, right?
Yes.
The second the dog points his nose in a direction it shouldn't be pointed, he knows, hey, that's not what I want. Go the other way. And it's easier on me. It's easier on the dog. Everyone likes it. The dog likes it. I like it. It's great. Big fan.
Exactly. It's about clear communication. And the level that I use on my dog, and again, all dogs are different, but the level of stimulation that I use on my dog's electric collar is so low that this is actually going back to the very beginning, Jim, when you asked about questions the public ask, is that a shock collar? Is it a shock collar? I mean, it delivers a kind of shock, but what I'll do is I'll take it off and I'll have them hold it in their hand and shock themselves with it. I say, I can call my dog off of a bite suit at this setting. And they're like, I can't feel it. And I'll have to turn it up higher. And they're like, that's it? It's like, yes, because it's all about communicating to the dog what I want him to do, right?
There may have been a party at one of my last bases where maybe we put the shock collar on one of the dudes for a bar bet, and maybe we took it to 11 out of 10.
Oh boy.
And he saw Jesus. So there was that. But
they can be misused.
I use that on people, not on dogs.
Right. Now, there's a time and a place where you're going to use a higher level of stimulation and essentially, shock a behavior out of a dog. The first thing that comes to mind is like rattlesnake avoidance. You teach a dog that when they hear the rattle, that means no. Other things that might potentially be hazardous or dangerous to the dog, you can use higher levels of stimulation on the e-collar for, and that's fine and appropriate, right? But the idea is that you need to know what you're doing, and they're real easy to misuse or abuse. So don't be that guy. It's not a shortcut, right? It is about clear communication. It is kind of push button in a sense if you know what you're doing, but you can also ruin a dog if you do it wrong. So all that being said, the only big training tip that I have for you, and I know we've been kind of alluding to training tips all along, but I think that those foundational philosophical lessons are important to get in there. Marker training. Marker training plays a really big role in just about any behavior most people need to teach their dogs. Marker training is simply using a word or a click, a mark as it were, or in the case of classical conditioning, a neutral stimulus to condition a dog to a certain survival relevant outcome. So a click or a word or a sound in the case of the dog, what the dog can hear means a correction or a reward is coming. And they can use that click or that sound to start to associate to behaviors that it should or should not do, which is operant conditioning. So if you go to, again, we'll put some links up. Leerburg.com is probably our favorite resource for a lot of dog training stuff. It's very thorough. I don't agree with 100% of the stuff that's on there, but I agree with enough of it that I heartily endorse the stuff that they put up there. They've got a lot of free material, articles, and ebooks. They've also got some DVDs and some classes online courses that you can take that are worthwhile if you want to pay for it. This is not a sponsored or it's an endorsement in the sense that I've used it personally and done all that, but it's not an advertisement. They're not paying us to tell you that. It's just a good resource. But marker training is something that you can use to teach your dog to do just about anything. I've used it to train my dogs to go to their crate. I've used it for obedience. I've used it to teach my working dog to follow a laser during a building search with a SWAT team. You can use it for just about anything. I'm telling you that right now. So we'll put some links to that, but just understand what it's doing is you're using a mark as a classical stimulus or classical conditioning stimulus, and then you're using that as a reward or a punishment for operant conditioning. Bottom line, that's what you're trying to do. And then the last thing that I want to hit on just before we go, I mentioned at length a number of times, both joking and a little bit serious times, that you might have to convince your dog to comply with you, whether it means whooping his ass in a submission or giving corrections in a more serious way. And I'm here to tell you, as a dog guy and a guy that works with dogs and likes dogs, that I have seen shitty trainers. And on both ends of the spectrum, guys that are just super compulsive, punishment based, swing a dog around like a helicopter, that's bullshit. It's bad. It's wrong. It's not okay. It's not necessary. It worked in the past. I get it. We've come a long way since then. So grow up, be smarter than the dog, and you can do better than that. I've also seen people who are all, super hunky-dory about like positive, motivational based techniques, no corrections whatsoever, blah, 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 blah. I'm telling you right now, you are setting that dog up for failure if you think that all of the positive and motivational stuff is going to make a behavior reliable enough to potentially save your dog's life or prevent someone from getting injured. So you have to find some kind of balance in the middle there and understand that having a strong working relationship with your dog so that they will do the things that you want them to do involves having a relationship with your dog. And there can be some overlap between training and exercise and play and affection, and that's all fine. But context matters a whole lot. So make sure that you are kind of building those three things into it: exercise, discipline, and affection. And understand that just because your dog does certain things in one context, if you want them to do it away from the home or your backyard or whatever, you have to get them outside and you have to keep working on it. It's never a linear thing. You have to kind of grow with your dog. So I think that's all I got for this episode, Jim.
So to kind of summarize, working dogs are their own thing, right? And they have certain elements of their personalities and magnitudes of drive that they need to have to do their jobs well. And that's different typically from what most people are going to want in a household dog. And because of that, there's a certain degree of training that the handlers and trainers have to have for a working dog that aren't necessarily necessary for a pet. So big picture, that's, I think, one key message. Another key message is if you want a dog to guard your house, you're not necessarily looking for an a-hole dog. As far as training goes, there's a lot to learn. This was one step. This episode was one step. There's more to learn. Hopefully we'll have further episodes about this because it's a thing that both Mike and I are passionate about, coming from different directions on that, right? Me as a passionate pet owner and Mike as a passionate working dog handler, professional working dog handler, right? That there are a few absolutes in dog training, but a lot of not absolutes in dog training. You got to figure out what's absolute, what's not. In my world, for a pet dog, there are certain absolutes the dog absolutely must do on command. If I say come, if I recall the dog, that has to work. If the dog's running to the street and I say get over here, that dog has to understand the words that I'm saying and has to comply. And it's on me as a trainer, me as a pet owner, to make sure that works, because the dog's life depends on me keeping that dog away from the car, right? If I say let go or aus or whatever, you can train your dog in German, you can train your dog in Klingon, if, for OPSEC for the dog or whatever, that's up to you. But one way or the other, if you need the dog to let go, that dog had better effing let go. And I don't care whether you give the dog, cookies for letting go or you pop his collar for letting go. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is the dog needs to let go when you say let go, right? And it's leadership and communication consistency and being self-aware about how you're coming across the dog, what you are training that dog, and what that dog is training you. And so hopefully this helped inspire you to go learn more and go get training and read a book or find Learberg. Both Mike and I have used them. Again, they're not paying us, but we have both found value out of the stuff they put out. And we both love our doggos. And hopefully you do too.
That's right. Good boy, Blitz.
All I got.
This episode is brought to you by Drip Drop. Drip Drop Oral Rehydration Solution is an electrolyte powder that you mix with water. It was formulated by a doctor for quick absorption. I work in the desert, and it only takes a few hours wearing body armor, carrying around a bunch of gear before I start feeling like crap and fall behind the curve in dehydration. Drip Drop keeps you in the fight so you can finish the mission and rehab for the next one. Berry and watermelon happen to be my favorite flavors. Go get you some at dripdrop.com or on Amazon, or ask your supply guy to get it for you.
This episode is also brought to you by Dry Fire Mag. Ammo is hard to find, and you need to stay proficient by working your dry fire training. Dry Fire Mag solves the common and annoying problem in dry fire training of constantly having to rack the slide to reset the trigger. With a Dry Fire Mag, all you do is clear your weapon, load this training magazine, and get to work on your trigger work. Check them out at dryfiremag.com.
Don't forget that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th every month. If you like what we're doing, head over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. That money's going to go back into bringing you good content. If you want to interact with us, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We are at TacTangents. You can also email info@tacticaltangents.com. And if you are on Facebook, head over to the groups tab on our page and join the podcast discussion group if you want to interact with like-minded people who also listen to the show. And Jim, that's all I got.
Thanks for coming out. Be safe. Be good to your dogs.
All right. Good talk.